welcome to another edition of Montpelier Connection. I'm State Representative Mike Mrowicki from the Windham 4 District of Putney, Dummerston, Westminster, and we have concluded the 2019 legislative session. We're back home now, and what we're trying to do is bring some of the local legislators in here to report on all the work that we did, and then look a little bit ahead to the 2020 session. Today's guest is Senator Jeanette White, the senior senator from Windham County.
Senior in more ways than one, yes.
Well, welcome. And thanks for taking some time out to come and talk with us. It was a pretty busy session.
It was.
The first year of a biennium can sometimes be busy and sometimes not so much as the second. And by the second session, people are sometimes running it around, scared that the sky's going to fall and they're not going to be there. But we got a lot done this year. And you in the Senate, you're on two committees.
Right.
And the House is one committee. We have 150 members and you have 30, so that's why there's disparity there. Now you're on the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah.
And then you chair
Government
Senate
Operations.
Government Operations.
Yep.
And there was a lot of work that came out of both of those committees. One of the big bills that you spent a lot of time on, and there was a lot of public input, was the waiting periods for firearm sales. You want to share a little bit about that process and where we eventually landed?
Sure. It started, I guess there was a companion bill in the House, and it was, I think, a 72-hour waiting period. The one in the House, in the Senate, was a 48-hour waiting period. There was a lot of controversy around it, and we did hear that many suicides are impulsive suicides, and that if this can act as a deterrent, then it's a good thing. So the bill that ended up, after a lot of testimony and a lot of compromise on both sides, was a 24-hour waiting period. And then on the other side, there was last year when we passed the bill, it had a ban on magazines over 10. What that does is it precludes any gun clubs from having competitions, because competitions all use over 10, usually 30.
And this is something that many of the gun owners and target shooters wanted.
Right. And I actually, 2 years ago when we voted on it, I actually voted for the amendment that would have lifted that ban for competitions, but it didn't pass the Senate. So this year that was part of the waiting period. So it was kind of a compromise on both sides. And it went to the House, and I think they just passed it pretty much like it was, and then the governor vetoed it.
Yeah.
So, which I found a little surprising that he vetoed it, but he did, and that's where we are.
Yep, I was surprised as well. I felt like it was a good compromise bill, that all the people involved who were at the table actually got something, and a lot of people pulled back and didn't push their position as hard, including the gun owners.
Yeah, it was.
And we didn't hear as much pushback on it because there was something in there that they wanted. So it's still a problem in terms of public safety, both for suicide and domestic violence. And the other thing we found out is we did take testimony that this could help with drugs for gun swaps. Where,
we didn't hear any of that.
Yeah, the House did, and my colleague Nodder shared in our committee that it would help stop some of those drug dealers that come to Vermont, try and find a drug user to buy a gun for them, and then trade that for drugs.
Oh.
That if they had to wait a day, they weren't gonna.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. We didn't hear that at all.
Yep. So we did hear that in the House, and so that's a third component of this.
Yeah.
But we worked on a lot of different bills, and your committee's worked on a lot of bills. As chair of Government Operations, was that the committee that looked at the burn pits, or was it Judiciary?
No, it was Government Operations, and that was an interesting. I had no I did not,
And most
was
people
not
don't, so
aware
if you
of
could-
burn pits at all.
Yeah.
But what happened is that our current sheriff, Keith Clark, well, as of yesterday,
Yeah.
no longer our current sheriff, but his friend, the Deputy Adjutant General, Mike Heston, died in December.
Yeah.
And Keith called me and said this is the second or third death in Vermont from burn pits. And so,
what are burn pits?
Well, I'll tell you what they are. So he said, you've got to do something about it. So burn pits are these in the middle of arenas of war, or theaters of war, whatever you call them. Some of them are as big as 3 football fields. And they throw everything in them. They throw old tires, old Jeeps, food scraps, human excrement, body parts, dead animals, everything in there, and then just douse them with accelerant and burn them. And we heard a ton of just horrible testimony. One young man came up and sat down and he said, my name is Wesley Black, I'm 33 years old, and you're looking at The Walking Dead. I have 2 years to live, because he was there. So everybody who served, and in those, it's 5 different arenas, is susceptible to the diseases caused by them, and they are causing, I can't list them all now, but it's a list this long of diseases that actually come from them. And one very interesting fact that we learned was that when Brigadier General Heston was serving, he was serving at a place where they were using the burn pits, and it started pitting, the ashes started pitting the surfaces of the airplanes.
Oh, really?
Well, you can't have that,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
that's going to affect their performance. So what did they do? They moved the burn pits closer to the camp. So now it was affecting people. And it gets into, it just goes into their very body and becomes a part of them. It's dust. They breathe it. It goes into the fine silt in the sand. It just becomes part of them. So what we did is, there is a burn pit registry. And what we found was that with Agent Orange, it took, they're still coming up with diseases from Agent Orange. And we decided we couldn't wait 15 or 20 years. So there is a registry, and the sooner they can get people to sign up for the registry, the sooner the health institute that does the research can start to have presumptive illnesses that are connected to them, and people can start getting care and benefits.
Sure.
So that's what we did.
If somebody out there has this experience or knows somebody, who would they get in touch with to sign up for this?
The National Guard or the Veterans Administration.
Okay.
And it's every single person that served in those theaters.
Yeah. This is the Middle East. This is Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran,
Africa.
Okay.
There's Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
It's a very scary thing, and our health department and the Vermont Medical Society are working together to inform all of our medical practitioners in the state to watch for the symptoms and get people signed up. So that was the focus of the bill, was to get people signed up for the registry.
Yeah.
We at one point we got so mad that we decided we would take on the Department of Defense, but we didn't have much clout there. So.
Well, that's certainly something that affects people today and on into the future. So good work there.
It's really, really important, and people should call the National Guard or the Veterans Administration, the Vermont Veterans Office.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, going back to government operations, one of the things that I was impressed with is something a lot of people run into only when they have problems, and this was the automatic renewable contracts that people sign, often online. So what's the...
Well, this isn't just... there's a difference between automatic renewable contracts.
Yep.
That's a different bill.
Okay.
You're talking about the unconscionable clauses?
Unconscionable clauses.
Which was judiciary.
Okay.
And what we found is that, here's an example of an employment contract. It can affect anything retail that you buy when you accept that contract, or an employment contract. And we found this in one of the employment contracts. If you wanted to file a sexual harassment suit, or if you had an issue, you had 1 hour from the time it happened to report it. You had to go to Nevada to file your claim. You could pick from arbiters from their list, who all happened to be VPs of their company. You were giving up your right to a jury trial and a class action suit. Those are unconscionable clauses in contracts, and we declared them unconscionable.
Yep.
And those kinds of clauses.
Consumer contracts also like that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When you buy an app for your phone, or when you buy a phone, or when you rent a car, or anything at all, you go right to the bottom and you sign. My guess is that 1 out of 500 people actually read that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did pass that, and we felt it was a really, really important bill, but the governor vetoed it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, there were a couple of constitutional amendments that started. So before we get to that, though, can you remind viewers what the process is to pass a constitutional amendment in Vermont?
Sure. So the framers of the Constitution made it difficult to pass, or to change, and that's good, because you want it to be a living document, but you don't want it to be passed willy-nilly. And in some states, they have constitutions that are this thick, and people don't even know what's in them anymore. So ours is the shortest in the country, and what happens is that every 4 years you can introduce a constitutional amendment. It goes to a committee just like a bill, and when it comes out of a committee, it has to start in the Senate.
Yeah.
And it goes to the Senate, and it has to pass by 20 votes. So even if there were
2/3.
Well, 20 votes.
Oh, okay.
Even if there were only 20 people there that day, it has to pass by 20.
Oh, okay.
It isn't 2/3
It's not
of
just
the
2/3.
No, it's 20
All right.
votes. And then it goes to the House, where the House can't change it or do anything. And then it just passes there by a simple majority.
But
then
up or down vote, no amendments?
Nothing, no changes. Then the next biennium, when you'll have new legislators, it goes back to the Senate and has to pass just by a majority, and to the House and pass by a majority. And then in the next general election, which for us would be 2022, because it has to go back to the 21-22 legislative session. It would be in 2022. It goes out to the general election.
So it would be a referendum.
No, don't call it a referendum.
All right.
It's you're voting on whether to accept the constitutional amendment. It is not a referendum.
All right.
A referendum is something that's telling the legislature what to do.
All right. And the governor, though,
It has nothing to do with it.
doesn't weigh in on this.
No.
All right. So now, there were 2 that we passed this year. So
Yeah.
could you tell us about those?
So the first one that actually passed both the House and the Senate was a guarantee of reproductive rights. And what that does is just says that you are guaranteed the privacy of your reproductive rights. They are yours, and you can control them.
Yeah.
And so that was a very exciting one to pass, and that has passed both the House and the Senate. And
And basically what it says is what's been practiced since Roe v. Wade will be codified in both statute and the Constitution, but we're not changing what's been the practice.
The constitutional amendment doesn't do anything about that at all. It says that there can be changes to this, and there can be restrictions, but there has to be a compelling state interest in order to do that. But future courts will decide what is a compelling state interest. So it's different than the statute that we passed.
Okay.
And then the second constitutional amendment that passed the Senate as in the House, but it has all of next year, was to change the first article, which guarantees people the right to, I wish I had brought it with me, it declares that all people are created equal and have equal rights. And there is a clause in there that has said, it says once they reach the age of 21. And people have interpreted that lately. In the past it wasn't interpreted this way, but lately people have been interpreting that to mean that the framers obviously approved slavery until the age of 21. And that wasn't the case. What that referred to was indentured servitude. And tons of people came here from other countries as indentured servants. And they'd work for a certain number of years and then they had their freedom.
Yeah.
And in most states at the time, most places, the age was 30. Well, Vermont, being the progressive state that it thinks it is, decided that males should be freed at 21 and females at 18. So it was actually a pretty progressive move, and but it has been so misinterpreted and has caused so much angst that we just took that out, and now it's the very first part of the article, and then it just says, therefore, slavery and indentured servitude in any form is prohibited.
Now, Vermont was the first constitution to ban slavery,
Yes.
right? But this clause has been seen as something that maybe is too ambivalent, and
Just recently. It never was in the past.
and we heard probably the same testimony you did from Professor Teachout, who said that initially he had thought this wasn't necessary. The Constitution's pretty clear, but as he heard testimony, he said, I came to see the perspective of people who thought this should be changed, and he came around. But he talked about how something about the Pennsylvania Constitution.
Well, the first part of Article 1 that just declares that everybody is created equal is a lot of the Vermont Constitution came from the Pennsylvania Constitution. And that first part of that article is just taken directly from the Pennsylvania. And then they added this. And I'll tell you, the conversations around this were just so exciting, and looking into the past. And one of the things that Professor Teachout said is, well, if they didn't word it exactly right, they probably could be forgiven because they were waiting for to go to battle, I think in Ticonderoga, and a huge thunderstorm came up, and they couldn't, it was lightning, and it was very, very bad storm. So they're hanging around in this place, and they decided to whip out the Constitution. So they did. So if they made some mistakes and didn't get it worded exactly right, they should be forgiven.
Yeah. So it's been over 200 years since that happened, and we're looking to change that now.
And I think it's a good change. I think that most people felt that, there were people who thought we should eliminate all references to slavery, but that then doesn't give the credit that Vermont deserves for being the first state to outlaw it in its constitution. And that's important. So those will travel that road between two different legislative sessions, right? Two different bienniums. Yep.
So it is not easy, but it can be done.
And the last time it was done was when we changed the Constitution to allow 17-year-olds to vote in the primaries if they'd be 18 by the election.
Now, for those of us who've been here a while and know how the Austin School used to be in Brattleboro, and we had, with the closing of the Austin School, that there was some who felt there was both services and advocacy we lost. There's still the hearing center there, and I know my family has taken advantage of that, having a daughter who has a hearing deficit, and it's just been great to have that there. However, some things were lost, and this year we did something about that. We created a position.
Yeah, our committee has been working on this for a long time, and we, after the closing, we set up a committee to a governor's committee that was going to work on more services and coordinating services for the deaf and hard of hearing and the blind deaf, because that's a whole separate category. And we tried at the time to get a position, because there is a director for the visually impaired, but there wasn't anything for the hearing impaired. And this year we finally got it in the budget. And so it's there. There will be a position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a position out of the governor's office?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Well, it's in Dale.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's
All
in
right.
the Agency of Human Services.
Okay.
And speaking of positions, we, our committee 2 years ago worked on setting up a panel that was going to then hire somebody and work with that somebody to look at the systemic racism in state government, not in the state, but in state government, and look at where our procedures and processes and stuff are racist. And so the governor has just hired a young woman from New York City to come and...
Who's quite experienced in this area.
Oh my goodness, yes. For being a young woman, she's had lots of experience, and I think it'll be great. And so she has a huge job in front of her, but looking at all the systems in state government and saying, where do we need to change the way we do things?
And I feel like it's a big step too. The face and faces of Vermont is changing, just like across the country. And what we're seeing now in our schools, our local schools now have 15%, some of them, people of color.
Right.
And across Vermont, the adult population of people of color is still 5% or less. But that's changing. It's changing fast. And it's important for us, I think, to be as open and welcoming as we can to all people. As we try to do. And this is an intentional way we can start to address some of those systemic changes that need to happen.
And that's a regular position in the governor's office that reports directly to the governor.
So it's not just a one-year thing, it's going to be ongoing.
And apparently we had a lot of applications because from what I understand from the governor's office is that this is the only position like this in the country, that there are states that have diversity officers, but this isn't a diversity officer. This is to look at the systems that encourage racist actions and racist outcomes. So it's very different than a diversity officer.
It's a big step.
It's a huge step, and I think it's very exciting.
Well, good work, because I know something you've been pushing for and working towards to help us get to that place. So
we got there.
We got there, So now be welcoming, and we'll get to work on that. One of the other things you've been working on has to do with the connection to Brattleboro here, something that you heard from in terms of what's known as limited self-governance. And the structure for most towns is that they have town charters.
No, very few towns have town charters.
Okay. So
just not to correct you, but to correct you.
Okay. So the towns that do have charters, though, can't change them without going to the legislature. Now, it's something that we've run into a lot. That it can be a process. And what Brattleboro, I believe, is asking now is for change that will allow them to do...
Well, it isn't just for towns with charters.
Okay.
If you have a charter, it's been approved by the legislature. So you can do things that other towns can't do because it's in your charter and it's been approved. As
an example?
You could have a 1% options tax.
Okay.
To a sales tax. If you don't, here's a very simple example. Appointing or electing a town clerk. Okay. If it's in your charter, like in Brattleboro's, you can appoint it, right? If you're Putney, you can't do that because you don't have a charter. And so towns with charters can do certain things, and towns without charters can only do what the legislature says they can do, because we're what's called a Dillon state. So about 30 towns did charters, created charters just so that they could elect or appoint their town clerks. Now that's really silly, but it took the legislature 4 years to figure out that this was something that we should allow all towns to do. So what this would do is allow towns, with or without a charter, to come with a plan and say, these are some of the things that we would like to be able to do to be more creative and respond to needs in our local community.
Yeah.
Whether it's a crosswalk someplace or a stop sign, or putting parking along a
Speed
street,
limits.
speed limits, without having to go through the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is just for Brattleboro?
No, it's a pilot. It'll be up to 10 towns.
Okay.
And they'll apply. Brattleboro may or may not be approved.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know.
Yeah.
There'll be a committee set up to approve the changes, and clearly there are some things they can't do, like you couldn't have your own gun laws.
Yeah.
There are some things that you wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah.
So
we've
and
only
that passed the Senate.
passed the Senate.
It's in the House.
It's in the House now.
In your committee.
Yeah. Yeah. We've only got a couple minutes left. Looking ahead to next year, anything at the top of the list that you hope will pass?
Well, we're doing more around. 2 years ago, our committee started doing more around law enforcement, the equitable access and funding of it.
Yeah.
And we're continuing to work on that. So we're going to be working on that. And there are some public records issues. I don't know what the big issue is that will come up, but I know that law enforcement is something that our committee really wants to work on. So.
Now,
And we have more constitutional amendments, of course.
we really don't have a structured system for law enforcement
No,
in
not at
Vermont,
all.
do we? And there's some people that say that's a detriment for us.
Well, I believe it is. I think that it's very complicated, and in the 30 seconds that we've got left, it's hard to explain. But sometime we should have a whole session on law enforcement.
And that might be something to do, even bring, we could maybe Skype in the commissioner to weigh in on this. But it is a complicated thing, and it's a change that may be coming to Vermont that we haven't had, where we need a better structure.
And it goes all the way from the training academy to, I mean, it's a very, very complicated area, but we need to figure it out.
Well, there's a lot more, and probably some things we haven't thought of yet.
Oh,
but,
man.
I appreciate your time, appreciate the opportunity to work together this year again.
Yeah.
And looking forward to doing some more work next year.
Yeah, I think that we can. I have to say that the press likes to talk about how we fight and don't get along and stuff, but for the most part, it's pretty amicable.
Yeah.
And even across, as we say, the aisles.
Yeah, I would agree. And when you see what's happening in other states, it feels pretty good about what we're doing here in Vermont.
It does.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for tuning in. And remember that we need to hear from you. To make democracy work even better, we try and be accessible to you. And our contact information will be put on the screen so you can get in touch with us. It's not too soon to start getting in touch with us about next session. And finally, I want to thank the people here at Brattleboro Community TV. BCTV has been doing this for a long time, bringing our work in the legislature closer to you here at home. So thanks for them and all their good work.
And we need to make sure they continue to exist.
Indeed. And we're working for that too.
Yes.
Well, take care and bye-bye now.